Krumlov Castle, Bohemia, the early 1740s. Behind a heavy oak door, no one dares to enter without vinegar-soaked cloth pressed to their face. The air inside is sweet, acidic, and unmistakably wrong. This is not a dungeon.
There is no other recourse.
It is the private chamber of Eleanor von Schwarzenberg, one of the most powerful noblewomen in Central Europe. She was born into privilege so absolute that doctors bowed before touching her, and yet her body is decaying while she still breathes. Something is growing inside her womb, something no physician can explain and no priest dares to name. Servants whisper that she drinks wolf's milk. Townspeople begin to use another word, vampire. This is not folklore retold for entertainment. This is a forensic reconstruction of how medical ignorance, fear and social power combine to turn a dying woman into a living biohazard. The horror here isn't superstition. It's what happens when science has no language and rumour fills the vacuum. Before we step inside that room, hit like and tell me where you're watching from.
I tell you,
because Eleanor didn't choose to
human.
become a legend, and the way this story keeps reaching people across places and centuries has never been a coincidence.
3 more gone missing from the east field, and the livestock
Krumlov
drained
Castle.
dry.
It whistles,
The
funnels,
vampires!
searches, threading its way along stone corridors before stalling at a place the household has learned to avoid. There is a heavy oak door there, always shut, never sealed. Servants slow as they approach it, and turn aside without being told. Cloths soaked in vinegar are pinned to the curtains, an old precaution against corruption and plague. The smell they give off is sharp and acidic, but it never quite wins. Beneath it lingers
Keep your
something
distance.
sweeter,
Look at her eye.
thicker, an odour no one wants
The
to
rumours
name,
are
but
true.
everyone
She is one of them.
recognises. In court routines and later accounts, this threshold becomes a boundary, not between rooms, but between the acceptable and the unspeakable. Inside is Eleanor von
Exorcisamus te,
Schwarzenberg. On
omnis
paper, she is
immunizationum
everything
spiritus,
early 18th
in
century
nomine
Central
Domini,
Europe values.
vade
Elite
retro
lineage,
satana.
impeccable marriage, proximity to power. She moved in circles where dynastic futures were negotiated over music and wine. Portraits show confidence, polish, a woman accustomed to being seen. But by the time this room becomes forbidden, her pedigree no longer protects her.
It burns.
It isolates her.
We
The
have to
same
leave
society
now.
that elevated her
Don't
now
look
treats her
back,
presence
just
as
run.
a risk. The space around her is contaminated. The transformation is not moral or supernatural, it is administrative. Once her body begins to fail in ways physicians cannot classify, she stops being a person and becomes a problem that must be contained. This is not a ghost story. What follows is a forensic reconstruction, pieced together from court behaviour, medical notes, and later testimony of how a woman became a monster in the
Her
public
condition
imagination
leaves us
because her
vulnerable
body
along the
violated
eastern
the
border.
limits of
We must
contemporary
secure
knowledge.
it now, but the
The
northern
most
flank
revealing
is
artefact
exposed
is
if
not
we
a
draw
relic or a
troops.
rumour, but a ledger. An 18th century medical record survives, written in tidy lines of ink. Dates, treatments, symptoms
Oh,
observed
Eleanor,
and re-observed.
My
It reads
dearest
calm,
mistress.
even
The darkness
dull,
has
but
finally
the
taken
repetition
her.
gives it away.
We must be careful
Measures
now.
are tried, then repeated, then escalated. The language stays polite while the situation clearly does not. Something is happening that no one feels equipped to control, and that is where fear enters. In an age when medicine cannot explain decay, explanation defaults to belief. If Eleanor were merely sick, there would be a script for that. Instead, she inspires containment, avoidance.
The liver
urgency
appears
after
engorged
death.
and notably darkened.
According to some
A
later
curious
accounts,
consistency
even her
indeed.
corpse is treated with
Have the
caution,
scribe note
as
the
if delay
texture.
itself is dangerous. That is the question that hangs in the corridor with the vinegar-soaked clothes. If she was not a vampire, why did powerful
Note
men
the
behave as
unusual
though her
discoloration
body,
here,
alive
near the
or
liver.
dead,
Indeed.
might still do harm?
The texture suggests
The next
advanced
step was
decay.
meant to be a cure,
Record that
but
finding.
the treatments chosen would only deepen the terror and give rumour exactly what it needed to survive. The first signs did not arrive with drama. There was
Faster!
no scream,
Pour the
no
lime!
collapse, nothing that demanded
It's stuck,
urgency.
I can't break through!
It began as a
We must
betrayal.
hurry, we don't have much
Small,
time.
intimate and easy to dismiss. A dull pressure low in the pelvis that came and went. A fatigue that lingered even after hours beneath silk
She
canopies
wears
and
the
warm
cross,
linens.
but her shadow
Eleanor
betrays
von
her.
Schwarzenberg did not look ill.
The
She
darkness
looked
is upon
merely
us.
inconvenienced, and in an 18th century court trained to recognise catastrophe only when it announced itself loudly, that distinction mattered. The physicians were summoned, and with them came certainty. not curiosity. They did not ask what the pain felt like. They told her what it was, an imbalance of humours, a wandering womb, female hysteria, diagnoses delivered with the confidence of doctrine. In their world, naming a disorder was the same as mastering it. According to surviving notes and later summaries, her complaints were categorised, not examined. The body, they believed, was misbehaving. Their duty was to discipline it. Treatment followed theory, not evidence. Food was reduced until weakness was reframed as improvement. Purging basins clattered across stone floors, their metallic echo lingering in the room long after the servants left. The sharp, ritualistic click of the lancet marked each controlled release of blood. Every intervention was deliberate, orderly, and wrong. Eleanor grew paler. The ache remained. The exhaustion deepened into something sleep could no longer reach. There is a particular terror in watching authority fail quietly. To modern eyes, the danger is obvious. Inside the room, it was invisible. The doctors reassured the family. They reassured one another. Some later accounts suggest that any hint the treatments were worsening, her condition was dismissed as emotional excess. A noblewoman, they insisted, could not truly be ill without spectacle. Pain without visible drama was treated as temperament. Days blurred into procedure. Fast, bleed, rest, repeat. Eleanor learned to measure time not by clocks but by interventions, and her body responded in the only language it had left. It did not argue, it did not adapt. It continued to fail, quietly, relentlessly, while the men charged with saving her congratulated themselves on their restraint. By the time the court began to sense that something was truly wrong, the illness had already crossed a threshold. What had started as a private discomfort was preparing to announce itself in a way no amount of etiquette, incense, or authority would be able to contain. The illness did not plateau. It was learned. What had once been a low, manageable pain began to arrive in waves, sudden surges of heat that left Eleanor shaking as if seized by something external. Witnesses later described the fevers as theatrical, almost religious in their violence. Her body trembled, teeth chattered, breath came in ragged bursts. In a culture trained to read suffering through the lens of possession, the resemblance was unsettling. Skin that had once been pale with health thinned and dulled, turning translucent, then sallow, as if the blood itself were retreating from the surface. The doctors responded the only way they knew how, with escalation. Heated compresses were pressed hard against her abdomen, meant to draw out the sickness. Instead, they blistered the skin, trapping heat and pain beneath the surface. Each treatment was justified as progress. Each left her weaker. The smell in the room changed, from herbs and vinegar to something scorched and faintly sweet. Servants learned not to linger. Medicine in the early 18th century was not gentle. Care was invasive by default. The body was something to be forced into obedience. Compresses were tightened, purges intensified, blood was taken again and then again, until standing became an effort. Some later recollections suggest that Eleanor began to dread the arrival of the physicians more than the illness itself. Every visit promised another correction, another theory imposed on a body already failing under the weight of too many explanations. It was during this phase that the first whispers began. A swelling appeared. Subtle at first, visible only when she lay on her back. It did not rise and fall like a pregnancy. It sat there, fixed and unresponsive, as if something had taken up residence rather than begun to grow. Those closest to her noticed it before the court did. The shape was wrong. The timing was wrong. And no one could agree on what it meant. The doctors insisted this was evidence of success. Inflammation, they argued, was proof the treatments were working. The body was responding. Their confidence hardened into authority. To question them was to question order itself. Meanwhile, Eleanor's strength ebbed. She spoke less. She slept in fragments. Her reflection, when she could bear to look, seemed to belong to someone older, thinner, already receding. This was the true horror taking shape. Not the swelling, not the fever, but the certainty in the room. As her condition worsened, the men entrusted with her care grew more assured, not less. They recorded improvement while she lost weight. They announced stabilization while she could no longer walk unaided. And somewhere between the blistered skin and the unyielding theories, the illness gained something invaluable: time. By the moment the court finally sensed that the cures were not healing, but feeding whatever was inside her, the disease was no longer hiding. It was preparing to be seen. When the palace physicians finally ran out of language, the forest stepped in to finish the sentence. The official treatment stalled, then quietly stopped. Compresses were removed, ledgers went thin, and into that vacuum crept something older than medicine: folklore. In the countryside surrounding Krumlov, there was a belief that certain illnesses were not sicknesses at all, but corruption, blood gone wrong. And for corrupted blood there was only one cleanser strong enough: wolf's milk. The idea did not come from peasants alone. It filtered upward, carried by midwives, servants, and lesser healers who had seen bodies fail in ways the universities could not explain. Wolf's milk, taken from a nursing she-wolf, was said to return balance by force. It was wild, dangerous, ungoverned, everything Eleanor's body was no longer allowed to be. When the court sanctioned it, they did not call it superstition. They called it a last resort. The hunt began at night. Men moved through the bohemian woods with covered lanterns, tracking the low sounds of a den. According to later accounts, they waited until the wolves were distracted, drawn away by bait or noise. The milk was taken quickly, hands shaking, breath held. It was warm when poured into sealed vessels, thick, animal, alive. By the time it reached the castle, it had become something else entirely, a substance stripped of context, transformed into hope. To Eleanor, the milk felt different from everything that had come before. It was not burned into her skin or pulled from her veins. It was consumed. Some accounts suggest she believed in it. Others imply she simply wanted to believe in something that did not arrive with instruments and pain. In a body exhausted by correction, the act of drinking felt almost merciful. A few witnesses later claimed her strength returned briefly, that her eyes sharpened, that the swelling seemed to pause, but the room changed. Servants whispered. Courtiers stopped meeting her gaze. What looked like healing to Eleanor looked like contamination to everyone else. Wolf's milk was not neutral. It belonged to the forest, to predators, to things that fed at night. To drink it was to cross a line. She was no longer being treated like a patient. She was being watched like a risk. This is where medicine tipped into myth. The treatment meant to save her became evidence against her. She wasn't just consuming a remedy, she was consuming the wild. And as the milk ran out, and her condition worsened again, the story wrote itself faster than any diagnosis could keep up. If Wolf's milk had failed, then whatever lived inside her must be stronger than nature itself. By the time the doctors returned, clipboards in hand, the court had already decided on a more compelling explanation. Whatever was growing in Eleanor no longer needed a name. It needed containment. Fear does not wait for permission. It spreads faster than illness, faster than facts, and once it escapes the palace walls, it no longer belongs to anyone who could control it. The first whispers begin below stairs, where servants gather in the warmth of kitchens and speak in half-sentences. A glance held too long. A tray returned untouched. A room that smells wrong even after it's been scrubbed. By the time those whispers reach the taverns beyond Krumlov, they have already hardened into stories. The palace responds the only way institutions do when they sense panic, by trying to bury it under ritual. Incense burns constantly now, frankincense in the corridors, myrrh near the doors. The air grows thick, layered, almost ceremonial. But the scent is honest. Beneath the sweetness, something sour persists. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just wrong. Visitors don't comment on it aloud, but they shorten their stays. Servants learn to breathe through cloth. What is actually happening to Eleanor's body is recorded quietly in medical notes that never leave the court. Persistent discharge, skin that no longer heals cleanly, fatigue that deepens into collapse, Signs of organs failing one by one, not with violence, but with exhaustion. To a modern eye, these are markers of a system breaking down. To an 18th century public, they become something else entirely. The language shifts. Illness turns into corruption. Symptoms become signs. A sore that will not close is no longer a wound. It is proof that something inside her is feeding. Weight loss becomes evidence of drainage. Fevers are reimagined as hunger. Every clinical failure is translated into a supernatural one. People don't need to see her to believe it. They only need the outline of a story that explains their unease. And the story that takes hold is simple. Whatever Eleanor consumed has changed her, and whatever has changed her is no longer human. The tragedy is that the court knows better and does nothing. They understand that rumour cannot be corrected once it acquires momentum, so they choose silence. Names are removed from schedules, access is restricted, the absence becomes its own confirmation. If there were nothing to fear, they reason, why all the doors? By the time the bells of Krumlov toll at night, the town no longer hears them as prayers. They hear warnings, and inside the palace, as incense burns hotter and the air grows heavier, Eleanor realizes something has shifted. The pain is no longer the worst part. The worst part is understanding that whatever is killing her has already outpaced the truth, and that the story being told outside these walls will survive her, no matter how this ends. No decree is issued. No announcement is read aloud. Eleanor von Schwarzenberg is not condemned, dismissed, or formally removed. She simply begins to vanish. Invitations stop arriving. Her name no longer appears on the daily court list pinned outside council chambers. Servants who once waited for her instructions are reassigned without explanation. The machinery of the palace does what it does best when something becomes inconvenient. It edits her out. This is institutional horror in its most efficient form, social death without accusation, the kind that leaves no paper trail because it requires no decision, only consensus. Everyone understands at once. If she is not mentioned, she cannot be questioned. If she is not seen, she cannot contaminate. The corridors grow longer as access narrows. The camera would glide through rooms still dressed in silk and gilt, chairs perfectly aligned, mirrors polished to a sterile shine, but untouched. These spaces are no longer meant to be lived in. They are buffers. Each one is another layer between Eleanor and the rest of the court. Her final quarters are not a dungeon. They are worse. They are beautiful, quiet, and sealed off under the language of care. Quarantine, they call it. Protection, they insist. But the doors only open inward. Physicians' notes from this period shift in tone. The language becomes evasive. Nervous agitation, restlessness, disturbance of the spirits. These phrases appear again and again, as if repetition might turn uncertainty into diagnosis. What they are likely observing, though they do not name it, is delirium born of infection, fever, and prolonged isolation. The mind frays when the body is under siege, and it collapses faster when the world pretends you're already gone. Eleanor begins to notice the pattern before anyone explains it to her. Conversations stop when she enters a room. Eyes slide away. Even prayer feels staged now, performed at a careful distance. She's still breathing, still speaking, but the responses come late, or not at all. To be treated like a ghost while still alive does something specific to the human mind. It strips time of shape. Days blur, nights stretch. Every sound in the corridor becomes a possible judgment. Some accounts suggest she grows suspicious of her attendants. Others describe sudden weeping, followed by long, silent staring. The doctors interpret this as weakness of temperament. They do not connect it to the fact that she has been removed from the social world that once confirmed her existence. The palace has decided she is a risk, and risk must be contained, not cured. And somewhere in that quiet, something irreversible takes root. Because once an institution learns how to erase you gently, it never needs to bring you back. Eleanor has not been declared dead, but she has crossed a threshold just as final. Beyond it, she's no longer a woman in crisis. She's a problem being managed. And the most dangerous realization comes late at night, when the halls are silent and the doors remain closed. If the palace has already learned how to live without her, it may also be preparing for what comes next, when even her body will be considered something that needs to be controlled. Sleep becomes impossible before madness becomes visible. Eleanor's nights fracture into short, fevered intervals, 10 minutes of unconsciousness, then jolting wakefulness, soaked in sweat, heart racing as if she has been called to judgment. The body no longer rests, it only pauses. With exhaustion comes distortion. Shadows linger too long on the walls. Footsteps outside her chamber sound deliberate, measured, rehearsed. She begins to count them. She begins to wait for them. Paranoia does not arrive as hysteria. It arrives as logic pushed too far. Eleanor starts to watch her attendants carefully. She notices how they whisper before entering, how one of them crosses herself before touching the bed linens, how another hesitates just for a second too long before offering water. In a mind deprived of sleep, these pauses acquire meaning. She becomes convinced, quietly, rationally, that they are waiting, not for instructions, not for recovery, for an ending. The fever feeds the suspicion. Heat surges through her body in violent waves, followed by shivering so intense her teeth chatter against one another. Time stretches. Bells ring somewhere in the castle, or perhaps only in her skull. The boundary between thought and sensation dissolves. At moments she feels herself observing the room from above, detached, as if already rehearsing her own absence. The physicians note agitation. They do not record the fear. Religion moves in where medicine has retreated. Prayer intensifies, not in privacy, but as spectacle. Priests arrive in pairs, then groups. Relics are brought in, bone fragments, scraps of cloth, sealed in ornate reliquaries, and placed directly on the swelling beneath her abdomen. Hands press them there as if weighing something down. Incense thickens the air. Latin chants echo through the stone corridors at 3 a.m, voices rising and falling in a rhythm meant to cleanse, to expel, to correct. To the court, this is protection. To Eleanor, it feels like preparation. She listens from her bed as prayers are recited over her body, not around it. The language is careful, impersonal. Salvation, release, mercy. No one says healing anymore. At some point, no document records when, she understands the shift with brutal clarity. The rituals are no longer directed toward her survival. They are rehearsals for a death everyone has already accepted. That realization changes something fundamental. The fear sharpens, then settles into a colder shape. If they are praying for her departure, then she is no longer a patient. She is a threshold. And once a woman becomes a threshold instead of a person, the final boundary is no longer far away. Because the next question the palace will have to answer is not whether Eleanor can be saved, but what must be done with her once she is gone. Her heart stops quietly. No scream, no final convulsion dramatic enough to justify the fear that has been building for months. Just a sudden stillness in a room already heavy with incense and resignation. For a brief moment there is relief. The suffering has ended. The vigilance can relax. Then the panic sharpens, because death in this case solves nothing. If Eleanor had been dangerous while alive, she is infinitely more dangerous now. Servants do not rush in. They hover at the threshold, unsure whether crossing it is an act of duty or contamination. Someone orders the windows opened despite the cold. Someone else insists they remain shut. Vinegar-soaked clothes are replaced, then replaced again, as if the smell itself might escape and infect the castle. The body is not washed immediately, it is watched. Guards are posted, not to protect her, but to contain her. Outside the palace walls, the story mutates faster than any infection ever could. In taverns and market squares, her death confirms what rumours already decided. She drank wolf's milk. She swelled unnaturally. She rotted while still breathing. Now she is dead. To the public mind, the sequence is complete. The word vampire no longer sounds hysterical. It sounds explanatory. That is when the situation becomes political. The Habsburg court understands something instinctively. Myths do not need evidence. but they do need silence. And silence is exactly what Eleanor's death threatens to break. A noblewoman of her rank dying under suspicion of monstrosity destabilizes more than reputations. It destabilizes order. If people believe the court sheltered something unnatural, fed it, hid it, prayed over it, then authority itself begins to look complicit, even cursed. Letters begin to move, not condolences, calculations. Advisors warn that burial alone will not end the speculation. In fact, a sealed coffin might make it worse. The myth will survive underground. It will crawl. It will return. And so a decision is made that would have been unthinkable only weeks earlier. Her body must be opened. An autopsy on a high-ranking noblewoman is almost unheard of in this world. It is a violation not only of dignity, but of hierarchy. Noble flesh is not meant to be examined like butchered meat. But the court no longer needs reverence. It needs proof. Something solid enough to crush rumour. Something clinical enough to replace folklore. The order is given quietly. No announcement. No witnesses beyond those deemed absolutely necessary. This is not an act of curiosity. It is an act of containment. The state is preparing to dissect a legend before it escapes its control. And as Eleanor's body is moved, carefully, deliberately, into a colder room, the irony settles in. She spent her final months being treated as something inhuman, and only now, after death, will anyone finally look at her as a body governed by biology. But whether biology will be enough to silence fear remains an open question. Because once a woman has been labelled a monster, even the knife may not be sharp enough to cut the story free. The room chosen for the examination is stripped of ceremony. Stone walls, a narrow table, winter light pressed thin through a high window. The physicians arrive without audience or announcement, carrying their instruments wrapped in linen, as if sound itself might contaminate what is about to be done. Aromatics are burned aggressively. Juniper, rosemary, vinegar, but they do not conquer the air. They only sit on top of it. Beneath everything is a heavier presence, sweet and unmistakable, the smell of a body that has been failing from the inside for a very long time. There is no drama in the procedure, no raised voices, no shock, just a method. The body is opened with the careful restraint of men who understand that what they are cutting into once ruled rooms like this. Notes are taken, measurements recorded. The tone is professional, almost cold, but the findings force pauses. Organs displaced, cavities flooded with fluid far beyond what should exist. Tissue so altered it barely resembles its original function. At the centre of it all, a mass, large, invasive, and consuming, entangled with the organs meant to give life. This is not a pregnancy. It never was. What the doctors are seeing is advanced internal disease, a slow, aggressive takeover that began quietly and expanded until it commandeered the body's resources entirely. Today, the language would be precise. Advanced cervical or uterine cancer, systemic failure, metastatic spread, a biological rebellion that modern medicine recognizes instantly. But in the early 18th century, those words did not exist with authority. The body can be described, measured, even drawn, but its meaning remains unstable. The report is circulated among the highest ranks. It is factual, detailed, unemotional, and yet it lands without impact. Because outside this room, the story has already chosen a different explanation. To the court, cancer is a vague abstraction, a word that explains suffering but not fear. It does not account for wolf's milk. It does not explain swelling that looked alive, or decay that seemed willful. It does not satisfy a public desperate for narrative clarity. Vampire, on the other hand, does all of that effortlessly. It gives shape to panic. It assigns intention to illness. It transforms confusion into certainty. So the autopsy does not end the myth. It only competes with it. The physicians have proven that Eleanor was not monstrous, but proof requires trust, and trust is precisely what has already rotted away. In a world without biological literacy, the most convincing explanation is not the most accurate one. It is the one that feels complete, and so the body is closed again. The report was filed, the instruments were cleaned. Officially, the matter is settled. Unofficially, nothing has changed. The court has its answer, but the people have theirs. Because in 1741, science can describe what happened, but it cannot yet command belief. And once fear has learned a name, it rarely accepts being corrected. The burial is handled with speed that borders on panic. There is no procession meant for public memory, no lingering ceremony to invite questions. The coffin is sealed immediately, reinforced with extra wood, extra lead, extra weight. Stone is laid over stone, lime is added. The gestures are not symbolic, they are defensive. The court behaves as if whatever destroyed Eleanor's body might still be active, might still leak, might still move. This is not how a beloved noblewoman is laid to rest. This is how a threat is contained. Orders are issued quietly. Servants who worked closest to her are dismissed or transferred. Rooms are scrubbed, aired, then locked. Inventories are revised. Her name fades from schedules, from correspondence, from casual speech. It is not an erasure announced aloud, but it is precise, efficient. The kind of disappearance only institutions can perform well, and in the vacuum left behind, the myth finishes its work. Eleanor is no longer discussed as a woman who endured years of untreated disease, misguided medicine, and institutional abandonment. She's no longer a wife, a daughter, or a patient. She becomes a warning, a cautionary tale whispered to children, a justification for fear. The details harden into folklore, the swelling, the decay, the strange remedies, the sealed grave. The facts lose their edges. The legend keeps its shape. Because legend is useful. It protects authority from admitting failure. It spares physicians from confronting their own limits. It gives communities a language for terror when biology offers none they can trust. Saying vampire is easier than saying we did not know what to do. Saying monster is safer than saying this could happen to anyone. The cold truth is less dramatic and far more disturbing. Eleanor did not become something unnatural. She was abandoned by a system that mistook confidence for competence and ritual for care. Her body failed loudly, visibly, and publicly. And when that failure could no longer be explained, it was transformed into myth instead of understood. Legend is not born from lies. It is born from facts that arrive too early, before a society is ready to face them. And that is why the story doesn't end with the autopsy. It ends with silence, stone, and a name that survives not as a person but as a threat. So ask yourself this, before you move on. If your only tools were prayer and rumour, and the person you loved was rotting before your eyes, what would you believe? If this story stayed with you, don't let it end here. Subscribe now and turn on notifications, because the next video uncovers another buried truth history tried to hide. Miss it, and you miss the pattern.